going to get started. It looks like the clock is working back here, and by my phone it's 9. And I have a lot of slides, so I get started. Today I'm going to be talking about how you can start thinking about enhancing accessibility for all law students. My name is Karina Condra. I'm from the GU Sturm College of Law, Westminster's Law Library. I wear many hats there. I'm the Emerging Technologies Librarian as well, the FCIL Librarian. We're a pretty small staff. And one of the issues that we've been dealing with campus-wide, and I'm sure many universities are dealing with now, is accessibility. How many of you have had students who have disabilities in your classroom and had to deal with it? How many of you were prepared to deal with it in advance? Show of hands? No. Sort of, right? I mean, I've had a couple instances where a student has just shown up to my class and he needs some accommodations. And no one told me, even though they're supposed to warn you before it happens to make it a seamless transition for the student, it doesn't always happen that way. So the things that I like to think about is how, when I'm developing courses, but also because I manage the website and LibGuides and all of these other things, what can I do to make that transition and not make it difficult on the student, but also myself when I'm teaching or providing services at the library. So, what is accessibility? It's designing access for materials, websites, anything that you use in the classroom, but also anything that the library is using so that it's accessible for all students, users. So class and training content for the students who are taking it. University websites, library materials, building spaces. All of this, you probably know, we're required to do this. Now this, what I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to focus more on the web and those issues, but know that it goes beyond the web, and I'm not going to be talking about physical space issues today. It's way beyond an hour talk if I'm doing everything. So why do we care? Things that we have to think about. It's mandated by law for most institutions. And I'm not going to get into the details of the legal aspects of it, but this creates lawsuits. I get alerts from Law 360, and I think in January I saw an alert. 50 universities were filed suit against by a person who is visually impaired. So he filed suit against 50 universities because their websites were not compliant. So there are people out there, and there's law firms that represent people who are physically challenged, and they're forcing public institutions to comply with the law. So I think you have to be aware that this is something that impacts everybody, especially at public universities and private if you get federal money. Also, how many of you have a mandate from your university that you have to make materials compliant? Anybody? Yeah. So this is something that we're doing, or I hear through the grapevine that's coming down the pipeline at my university. The university's thinking about doing a university-wide mandate for certain things. So you're going to have to do this eventually. Whether it's when you just have somebody who needs accommodations and they're in your class, or you're providing library services to them, or the university says any public-facing document has to be ADA compliant, which is happening more and more. So the other thing is because it's ethically responsible, and also there's studies showing that if you design universally for all students, then everyone learns better. We'll talk about this. Captioning is better for all students, and it aids every student when they can read and listen at the same time. So if you design from the beginning to help every student, then you're aiding all students. So think about it that way. It's more of a, let's help everyone, and this is what ethically is responsible as educators. And that way I think it doesn't seem as hard or challenging. So how do we achieve this? And this is what I'm going to be talking about throughout this, is awareness of barriers. When I started web design and took my first HTML class, they didn't talk about what makes a website usable. This was back in the early 2000s, and we didn't think about, what happens when JAWS reads a website. It wasn't until I had a student who was visually impaired and I was showing things on Westlaw and on my LibGuide, he says, my JAWS is not reading this website. And so I had to figure out another way of delivering those materials to him. And I did. I felt really bad about that. So awareness of the barriers and the challenges for these students. Familiarize yourself with how assistive technology works. So JAWS and all these software that students use to help them access the materials. And then, what I've talked about and mentioned is universal design, which is accessible design. We talk about this, we've been talking about universal design forever. Really, universal design can make things more accessible for those who have challenges. So how are we tackling this at the university? At DU, we have established at least 2 that I know of accessibility task force. One is on the university level, where they're looking at how to tackle this challenge university-wide. What are they going to do? Are they going to do a mandate that all schools have to comply and make every single PDF on the 1,000+ websites that we have, and who knows how many documents, accessible? I sit on the university library's accessibility task force. So when the university as a whole set up an accessibility task force, the main library set one up. And I represent the law school on this accessibility task force. There is a person from every single department of the library sitting on the task force. And what we did at the beginning was we did an audit of the services and how this is going to impact every department of the library. So collections. What does collections need to think about in order to make every single book that we lend accessible? How many of you thought about ebooks? How many of you linked to ebooks in your course reserves? How many of you downloaded an ebook PDF and put it on Canvas? Good. When you download chapters from ebooks, They're not accessible because they have digital rights management. You have to go through these other steps to make it. It's much better just to add a link so that they sign in and actually use the ebook reader, because that is accessible. It has to be accessible. So a lot of what we're talking about in this accessibility task force is what materials, what are we going to do? Databases. Had no idea because they don't deal with technical services or purchasing. VPATs. You know, those are the documents that every database provider should be providing the library to say whether or not that database or resource is accessible and how accessible they are. So we're going through and auditing every single department. We basically have this huge spreadsheet now that says what is wrong, what are we not doing, and how are we going to fix that. So what we've decided is, as the university libraries, start doing department and unit training on how to make things accessible. What can you do to make accessibility? We've developed, and we're starting to develop, training guides. These can be in the form of a LibGuide or wikis. I have a link here to example of one from NC State University. This is a university-wide website that just goes through for faculty and staff, IT, what they need to be doing with accessibility. There's many examples out there. Because we're just starting, we haven't developed one yet, but this is on our agenda to do. So creating documentations, we've got this spreadsheet that lists, we're developing a spreadsheet listing where we can find all the VPATs, we're listing issues by department. We're also developing checklists. We have an Office of Teaching and Learning that already has a checklist. How do you make your Canvas website accessible? What to do, what not to do. Make this part of your workflow. So I manage the LibGuides and the website at the law library. I'm training everybody to make it part of their website workflow. If they're creating a LibGuide, make sure they're putting alt tags for images. Make sure they're not going out of the way and doing crazy things with fonts that don't add to the accessibility of the document. And then do audits of your website or other sources if you're doing. So, major hurdles. Money. Some of the technologies that you need to make things 100% ADA required can cost money. So captioning requires 99% compliance. You can pay for transcription and captioning services. That costs money. Are you going to do this on a departmental level? I really think universities need to start thinking about what money can they spend on technologies that will make that will help all departments be able to comply. We just had we're doing a lot of website design, and we just had Pantheon come in, which is a higher level website tool. And I asked them about accessibility, and basically they said, well, once you're on our site, as a website administrator for the whole university, you can plug in checks, accessibility checks. So before you even deploy a website page, anybody in the university has to go through an accessibility check. So there's things that it'll cost, but it will make it better on the long run. It does take a lot of time and resources to make things compliant. That's one of the biggest complaints I hear. Oh man, this is going to take forever. How many of you have digital repositories? Yeah. We're right now, our one person who manages the University Digital Commons is going through with a bunch of work study students, checking every single document on Digital Commons to make sure. Because they weren't sure, they didn't have that workflow in place. So it does take a lot of time and resources to do this. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of go over some of the easy ways that if you're doing course design, website design, things that you can think about to show that it's not that hard to make your documents, your websites accessible if you put it as part of your workflow and just think about it from the very beginning. So text accessibility. Things to think about when you're writing for any kind of document. Colors. Can a colorblind person see the colors in your graphs, in your images? Is your contrast where anybody can see it? How many of you seen a PowerPoint slide and the contrast, you can't read it on the screen? Yeah, that's why I've gone really simple with my PowerPoints lately. Black on white, lots of contrast there. Think about your font styles. Font styles can really confuse students. And the font size also. If you have somebody, and I've worked in libraries where I have somebody, a patron come in and they're using a magnifier to view my website. If you use EMs with your font size, that allows them to adjust the font size easily on your website. So these are things that you can think about. Colorblindness. A normal subway map is always in color. But if you choose certain colors, this is what a colorblind person sees. So it makes you're using color to give information. And we always do this, right? It doesn't work for everybody. You have to have an alternative way to distinguish what these lines are. So think about that when you're designing something. Color contrast. You can't really see the text here. There's a lot of noise there because there's no contrast between the image in the background and the white text. I simply muted and put a filter over the image and made the text come out a little bit better here. So it's just a few things that I did on an image editor to make it slightly better, right? It doesn't take much time once you've learned how to do it. PowerPoints and presentations. I see this a lot, especially when I teach and I make the students do PowerPoints. And they use these texts. That, by the way, says bad, font color too light. You can't even see it, right? It's in gray. And I've seen things like that. With a projector system and the blowout of colors, you're not going to be able to see it. That's why I've almost gone strictly to black and white. That contrast is really good. Green, there's a lot of studies that green is the easiest color on the eyes. So read up on this. It doesn't take much to learn what is good and what is bad. Other things to think about. How many of you use graphs in your classes? When you just use color that's very hard for somebody who's colorblind or has trouble seeing. It's much better to use a combination of patterns and color when you create graphs. This, with a color, if you can't see the color, you can see still see there's stripes here, there's a checkerboard, there's a graph. It will allow them to see distinction between these. So think about that. Use good contrast, use both colors and symbols. Keep it minimal a lot of times. You don't want to put too many colors on your websites. How many of you have been to a website and it's got 50 different colors and you just your eyes want to explode? So think about that. There are so many websites out there that show you how to use colors appropriately on websites. This is just one example of a blog that posted a nice example of what colorblindness is, how to design accessibility for it. So a lot of times what I do is Google a problem, right? I tell my students this a lot too with web design, if they're trying to figure out an issue with their computers. This is what I do a lot to find references on how I can make my presentations better. If you're building websites, there's all kinds of recommendations to make your websites usable for everyone. Your recommendations for contrast ratios, small text, your contrast ratio of at least 4.5 to 1 against its background. Large text, so 14 point, but you're not supposed to use points. It's better to use EMs here.
How do you?
Yes.
How do you use I don't know what EMs are.
We're going to get to that. Yeah. I'll show you that. General font guides. Real text is better than using an image. So don't create an image with the text because that requires you to go in and put an alt text tag. Limit the number of fonts. Ensure there's contrast. Avoid very small font size. Limit the font variations, bold, italics, underlines. And do not rely on variation to convey meaning. What I mean about that is how many of you bold headers to show that it's a header, right? Are you applying a header tag when you do that? That's not readable by JAWS, right? The JAWS, when it reads websites, and I'm going to show you an example of this, if you just use bold as a navigation, the readers don't see that. So you have to think about that. You also want to use sans serif, safe fonts, Arial, Verdana, Calibri. As a website designer who designed LibGuides, I tell my LibGuide creators do not mess with my fonts. On an admin level, I've got a style sheet that I've made where all these things, if they don't go and change and use the WYSIWYG to change my fonts, to add styles that shouldn't be added, they're good. I did this as an admin to make sure that all my LibGuides are compliant. So that's one thing, if you manage it or you're an admin of a LibGuide, you can make your style sheets do this for all your users. As long as they don't try to go get creative and change things, then we're compliant. So, with EM, that's just a different type of font size, and really you have to do it on the style sheet level rather than with your WYSIWYGs. Because with a WYSIWYG, it's, they usually do points. So talk to your LibGuide administrator, because usually with a WYSIWYG, all you get is, let's go to LibGuides real quick. I'm just going to pull up one of my guides here. So when you're in here and I want to change this font here, you've got your font size. I tell my users, don't mess with this. I've already set the font. The sizes, I tell them not to use the size because I have the size as a EM. So if I go into my CSS file here, you can see that for headers here, I've set all my fonts to an EM. What that does is that allows me or a user, let me go back to the guide here, if they want to resize the text, it will resize in a way. If you make it a point, it'll always stay 12 point or 14 point. But if they need major magnification, that's just something you can think about. It's a very easy fix here. So educating yourself on what is and whether or not your website can do this here. Other things that I tell my guide creators to do, I think I expanded it way too much. Is when they are using navigation, and we'll talk about this, if they're trying to use this as a navigation, you want to use your headings. And if you're used to doing HTML, you can see it. It usually starts with heading 1 and heading 2. LibGuides have taken that away because heading 1 and heading 2 is used for their box navigation, their titles. So it's kind of forcing the content creators not to use the ones that are used for navigation. That makes it easier to read. Oh, sorry. So there are so many sources out there that will help you learn about how to design for websites. There's this color tool. I don't know how many of you used Google's material design. I do a lot of design. I'm not a designer. I was a photographer, but these really help me. I love this color tool because I can come in here and there's a setting in here and it tells you whether or not whatever colors you use and the text on it, whether or not that is compliant, ADA compliant. So get used to these tools. It's a beautiful, I love it because it helps me choose colors. I don't know anybody else who has struggles with coming up with colors. I'm really glad my university has a design guide that limits our colors, so I don't have to think about colors. But when I'm doing PowerPoints and things like that, or I have a graph, I come in here and pick some nice pretty colors and then test to see if my contrast is correct there. So I've listed a bunch here, a contrast checker. There's so many here, and there's guides on how to design for color blindness that will help you. Images. Images are some of the biggest problems. So I've used this image, and I teach foreign attorneys Intro to American Law. And when we talk about legislative process, I love this image that I got from a government website. This is so not compliant, right? What I need to do to make an image compliant is I would have to describe every single thing here in this image in the alt text. This is not something that you would want to do, right? I love this. It's a great flow, but really what you need to think about is if you're going to use an image to convey meaning, you also need to have a Word document or some type of Word example of this. So, problems with images. Images are inherently inaccessible to people who are unable to see them. Right? I saw one joke where it says, blind person ramp here or something. It's like no one's going to see that sign if you cannot see it, right? So think about that. Images do not use solely to convey information. Even if you have a graph image, you cannot rely just on that to convey it. You have to have a paragraph describing the content that's in that image. So what to do with images? Do not use images alone to convey meaning or content. This is an issue with simple things on websites. If you have a button that says click here, and you don't put an alt tab or don't assign something that JARS will read, then you're not going to, it's not going to be accessible. So if you're doing markup on a website, you can give, one of the things people don't realize is if an image is completely just decorative, now with PowerPoints and Word, you can click on an image and say decorative. And what that does is it tells JARS to ignore that image. So it doesn't try to read it or say the word image. If you're coding, usually when you embed an image, you put alt and then quotes, and that will make JAWS ignore the image if it's decorative. If there's meaning conveyed in the image, you need to use alt text tag. You want your alt tags to be brief and descriptive, avoid image of for online web images. And what I had discovered when I was looking into this is there's this great website that goes through and it shows you the purposes of the alt text and what a screen reader will do with those images. And here. So this is a really great resource. So here's what the screen reader reads without alt tags if you use images. So it shows you how to do this on the web here. Other thing to do, sorry, I'm going to escape here. If you're using images, if you on your PowerPoints or on Word, if you click on the image, then you can come and do picture format, and it's simply alt text. That's on any Microsoft Word. And then you can mark it as decorative, which I did here, or I can put one or two sentences that describe what the image is. So documents. This is probably one of our biggest challenge because our websites have a lot of documents posted on them. Now recently we did a redesign of the law school's website and I'm in charge of the library's portion of it. Took all the documents out. And I described whatever content was in the document, like our policies. We had put all kinds of documents up with our policies. Instead, I just turned them into web pages. instead of having them download. The web pages I know are compliant because we designed our style sheet to be compliant. But what you need to do is know how they're being read by JAWS, how they're being viewed. When JAWS looks at a document, it scans from top left to bottom right. And it uses clues for navigation. So what it does is for every single header, if you use the built-in styles for Word, it'll say section 1, legislative history. And then it'll let the student tab to the section, if you properly use the styles, that is most relevant to them. Instead of reading linearly through the whole document. Think of how frustrating it would be, because we scan documents, right? You go from heading to heading, find the heading that you want. Somebody with JAWS who his styles were not placed in the document and you didn't use headings, it would read every single word before it got to the pertinent section that you want. So if you just put words without having any structure or navigation in it, it's going to be very frustrating. So use built-in styles to aid navigation. PDFs, to make a PDF accessible, you need to have searchable text. It has to be OCR'd. Fonts that allow characters to be extracted to text. Some fonts don't allow this. Some fonts don't allow the Braille embossers or a read out loud tool. So you got to think about this. It's not just being able to read on JAWS. It's whether or not it can be changed to a Braille document, right? Forms are one of the biggest unaccessible things on the internet and in documents. You need to have interactive label form fields if you're going to use a document like a PDF form. PDF has accessibility checkers. It'll tell you if your forms are accessible or not. So structure tags so that you can assure proper reading order. And alternative descriptions for non-text elements. So, how do you make PDFs or any document accessible? If you have Microsoft Office documents, every single one of them has an accessibility checker now. In Adobe Pro, they have this accessibility checker. Run it on your PDFs before you post them. That will make them accessible. But another way of doing this is if you have a Word document that you convert to PDF, make sure that the underlining document is accessible first. And then that will make it much easier to create a PDF that's accessible. So always start with an accessible document and then make it an accessible PDF. I have the links here. Adobe has a great accessibility guide, shows you how to do it, that kind of thing. Also, on Office 365 products, they all have accessibility checkers and they enhance the all images features. So when I did a training at the law library with our reference librarians, this is what I showed them. If you go to review, and there's this link here. Now, I learned, which I didn't know while I was before I did this, you have depending on what Office product you have, this accessibility checker might not be in your ribbon. So you're going to have to add it. So if you're training somebody and they say, my Word doesn't have accessibility checker, it's not there. It's because you have to come in and do that add to the ribbon thing.
You mentioned before that you got rid of all the documents and changed everything to web pages.
Yeah.
and all of these tools for Office, Adobe can make things accessible. Did you just find they were more trouble than they were worth? And
No, it was just that we didn't have that many documents, and I thought it would be just easier for me, because I'm the only one who adds content to the website. I thought it was just easier for me to keep the documents on the website to a minimum, right? It also requires people to download to get the content. So it's an extra step that wasn't needed. So I was thinking just like for frustration, if you're on your phone to make it mobile accessible, it was much easier. You don't want to download something if you just want to read, So that was part of my reasoning. Now, if I have to add documents, this is what I do before I put it up on the website. I also knew we were going to go through another website change, so I was trying to make it as easy as possible. Going through, when I'm the only one doing the library portion of the website, 2 web redesigns and upgrades in the period of 2 years was just daunting to me. So I kind of tried to make it as easy as possible for myself. And that was one of the ways of doing it. Especially when you have to move documents. Think about that. If you're changing servers, if you're, have to change where the documents live, it's better just to have it on the website so you don't have to think about all that. So, web barriers and fixes to those web barriers. So we've been talking about JAWS. I don't have JAWS on my computer. One of the things that our school's doing is it's purchasing JAWS for all the departments so that we can test to see whether or not,
How much is it?
Oh, I don't know because I don't purchase things. I just heard that this is the main, the university apparently is buying JAWS so that it can fit on the library's computers for access, and then also for departments. I think it's in contract review right now, so 6 months from now, who knows? But I can't wait to get my hands on it so I don't have to go across the street to do accessibility training. How many of you have experienced JAWS? Yeah. So not that many. It's really, when you do it and you realize, oh my goodness, it's so hard for my students who have to use this. This is a demo of the New York Times being read by a screen reader. I don't know why the volume is not. Sorry. Said it was going to work. I'm not sure why this is not reading.
Maybe the volume of the press chart is not up.
Yeah, let's see. Because I really want to show this. It's not reading. It's just scribe. What it's doing is it's going from one section to the next. And because they did not put alt tags in there, and most of their buttons or images, it's just saying image, 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 in a very annoying voice. And so, it's not until they come to the actual headers that it's reading the content of the headers. But all the navigation, I'm not sure how the New York Times did this, but all the navigation up here are images without alt tags. So instead of this image world saying world, it's saying image. Because that's what the screen reader reads links to be if you don't set it up. So
Window, sections button, search button, internal link, list one item, link, add of list, login button, settings button, list the item US, link, add of list, front heading, list one item, Thursday, link, add of meeting, list 12, link, add of list, and entering the landmark, 32.
we can remix it to EDM sound, you know, link, you know. So that, it's just right across. And it's, can you imagine how frustrating it would be if you had set up your website and that's what it's reading to one of your students who has to use it? I'm really in awe of students who go to law school who are visually impaired or have any kind of disability, because the barriers there are just insane. So links, they say link when you get to a tag. So you do not, one of the things you think about when you're adding these alt tags, don't put the word link in there. So link to the library's website as an alt descriptor, they're going to say link to the library's website. So use a very short description. You don't need to use the word image to describe an image because it reads image when it gets to the image tag. Links should make sense out of context. Don't use click here, more. Also, try to be conscientious. Don't use the word see, because the person cannot see, right? Try to think of, something that's, if for more information, look here. Don't use look. For more information, visit this website. So think about you being politically correct, when you're using this. I never thought about that until I went to a training on this, and it's like, yeah, that's really insensitive if you use the word see and the person can't see, right? So think about that. So examples of links. Click here for directions. That's bad because it's not telling you where it's going to go. Directions to DU College are available online. And this is going to say, with JAWS, link directions to DU College. Learn more about LibGuides here and here. Learn more about logging into LibGuides because that says what that link is going to do, right? So think about that when you're creating your links. Tables, big violator. How many of you, when you first learned how to create websites, used tables for layout? That was a big thing. That is not readable it's so bad. And now with style sheets and things like that, we do not use tables for layout. If you do have to use a table to show information, you need to use the table headers. And this is in LibGuides, all the WYSIWYGs. You can place header cells. Always use header cells. It uses the TH tag, and then that is readable by these screen readers. Use data cells. If it's a data, use TD. There's a whole guide on table accessibility and what not to do with tables. I've put up here. So there's all kinds of guidelines for websites, W3C, the accessibility standards. Because all government websites have to be accessible, they have a huge usability guide, usability.gov, and then Google also has a web design accessibility guideline here. Videos are one of the most costly things. However, captions, there's a study I found here, source A Rising Tide, how closed captions can benefit all students. And it says that 90% of students find captions helpful. How many of you watch videos at work and have the sound off sometimes? Yeah. Sometimes voices bug me, so I just put the closed captioning on so I can read it. A lot of times I have captions on while I'm listening because I find I'm a very visual learner, and I find with the captions, especially for Barbary, when I had to take Barbary and watch videos that were mind-blowing, numbing, boring, I would read, and that helped me because I'm a reader, right? By capturing your videos, makes it so much better for everybody. Many students use them. They aid comprehension, accuracy, engagement, and retention. Reading and listening. That's why I always wish my professors used PowerPoints instead of just talking to me. So videos. I think it was in 2015. It was Harvard and MIT got sued because they had captions on their videos. They were not accurate or readable. So they tried, but they were not. And I believe to be ADA compliant, you have to pretty much have 99%. They have to be, the video player has to be accessible. So the controls have to be accessible. They must be readable by a screen reader. They have to have clean navigation. And then they have to allow enough time. Your videos, when you post them on websites, should be turned off. Don't automatically play because that can cause issues with these readers. And if somebody has manual problems, then they're scrambling to pause it until they get ready. So it's better to have them not autoplay. And allow for enough controls, captioning controls, sound controls, things like that, that'll make them more accessible to everyone. Captions for compliance, they have to convey, there's different types of captions and transcripts. Captions convey dialogue and narration and any audio effects. So if you're watching a TV show with the captions on, they say loud explosion when you see explosion. Transcripts and speech to text, this just accurately transcribes the dialogue. And then text to speech, it's voice over describing content for the hearing impaired. Now, to be ADA compliant, if you have explosions in a video, you need to explain the explosions, right? It's not just having text to speech. We don't have to worry about that unless you have some type of video that's a marketing piece and it has music. You have to say music playing and have the transcription of the music. So think about that. So how can you make your videos compliant? A lot of these video services, you can, like Panopto, we use Panopto and we have Kaltura now at the university. The law school uses Panopto. You can upload a script to your videos on Panopto and it will have a script. You can pay, and this is why I say it's costly, to have human transcription and closed captioning. Panopto, there's a $2,000 credit on our account, so if we need something to be closed captioned, because it's public facing, we can use our credit and then you can pay for anything beyond that as well. There's all kinds of captioning services. Some of them are really cheap. So it's just, it has to be part of your budgeting costs, I think. Something that you can do if you're using videos, like we have an online certificate in legal research for our part-time students. And what we've been doing is for our videos, you can use the auto captioning out of the box that comes with Zoom, Panopto, Kaltura, Camtasia. All of these have out of the box speech to text software. So let me show you real quick. Panopto. So here's one of our videos here. And if I push the edit button, and we didn't set this up, it's just our folders are set up to do captions. So you can see on the side here, I can do captions, import captions, and they automatically capture our captions when we record. And Zoom does this too if you record to the web. And then I can come in and make it, if I'm listening to it, what I do is make it 99% accurate by coming and easily changing what the automated thing does. Now, I said barriers, time. This is time consuming. But if you're reusing this video and you're going to post it online, you do it once and it's good. We have research assistants that and work study students that we're going to get to help us do this, because we have about, I think we have maybe 40 classes where we create these videos for. They're about 20 minutes long, so we need some help. It is time consuming, but it's doable. This is depending, the problem with this automated speech, it's anywhere from what I've seen, 70% or maybe less to 99%. I use a mic when I'm recording over my videos. I've stopped recording my classes and just posting those. I do voiceover over my presentations into a mic, and I try to talk slowly and clearly, and then that makes this much better at recognizing my speech. Here. So we have a couple minutes for questions. The last two slides are just resources that I've used over the years with checklists. We're right now creating checklists for all our workflows, and the biggest thing that we find is our librarians are coming to our trainings and then they forget. And so we're creating a LibGuide with all the instructions in them, but you know, we're talking about how to get the word out. We have newsletters to our staff. We keep pushing out, hey, remember, you know, all the training guides for accessibility is on the intranet. It's amazing what people forget. We have an intranet for our search staff. I was looking at it over a search staff's shoulder, and I was like, are you putting in the stats? She's like, well, I don't know where the stats are. They're on the internet, you know, you know, so you have to remind people where the trainings are and things. We're trying to figure out the best ways to get the trainings out and to train people. I think shorter trainings on one thing at a time is better instead of something like this where I go through everything. Any questions about this? Yes.
You mentioned you were investing in JAWS for your university. There are other products out there, other screen readers, and I've run into the problem where we knew that a student with a visual impairment was coming to start.
Right.
We had a dedicated workstation. The university had invested in a different screen reader, and he came in and was indignant that we didn't have the screen reader that he wanted, despite the fact that we paid a lot of money for another product, which was also met all of the requirements for ADA. How did you settle on JAWS, and do you run into this problem a lot?
I think, yeah, the main campus particularly, and part of it is you know, every university has a department for accessibility, and they're supposed to talk to the students when they come in and set up. I believe, and I'm not in charge of this, I believe we're looking into getting several different ones. And having it on at least one computer, not just JAWS, even though JAWS